Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of Beyond the Norm. You're looking at your two co-hosts here. I'm Mark Clementi.
I'm Colin Johnov.
And you may say, like, you're looking at us and thinking, you know, here's a 50-year-old dude and a much younger guy. How did you guys come to this point where you guys now actually have a podcast? Well, I have a business in Murraysville that you'll hear about here in a little bit. And Colin, thankfully, used to come in. We just had nice chats. He's a Pitt guy. I'm a huge Pitt guy. Colin actually played football at Pitt. So we hit it off right away, and we, every day would have chats and conversations. And Colin is now doing some great things with his own business that you'll hear about as well, Athletic Fortitude. And one day we just, why the heck aren't we doing our own podcast? Let's take what we're doing in the shop every single day with our conversations and put it out there. We think there's some value in what we're doing. And then when you add that we're going to bring guests onto the show, that, what they believe in certainly aligns with what we are going to be talking about here in the podcast. It made total sense. And so here we are, and we appreciate you finding us. Make sure you give us a like, a follow as we move forward. Hopefully you'll like what we have in store for you today. We think you will. We think you'll walk away with something that you can use in your daily life just to add to your own mental fortitude. But we're going to start off every week with the segment where we're scouring the news and we're trying to find a story, a person, whatever it may be, that aligns with what we're trying to do here. And this week just so happens to be the last week of the NFL preseason. And this is all not going to be about sports, by the way. I mean, we're going to be talking to, yes, athletes for sure, but we're going to be talking with senior executives, grandmasters in taekwondo. Can't wait for that one. Bodybuilders, another phenomenal story that we'll bring to you. Artists, every walk of life that you can think of. We're going to, try to find somebody that fits into that space and have them on the show just so everybody can hear their stories and learn from them a little bit. So, Colin, this week, let's talk a little bit about the NFL preseason last week, week 3. And I can't imagine what it must be like for these guys, their professional lives hanging in the balance. We're talking about bubble guys now. We're not talking about your T.J. Watson, Cam Haywards, et cetera. We're talking about those guys that are battling to become 52, 53rd, the 53rd man on their respective rosters. How would you prepare? I mean, you were there. You were up with the Bills. How would you prepare knowing that this game is that important to the future of your livelihood, really?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of things with that, and it really takes, you got to take a step back, and you have to look at all the preparation they've done to get to that point. You can't show up game day or competition time and look for some magic pill. It doesn't exist. Right, so if you have
something we can work on next.
Yeah, find the magic pill. But if you haven't put in the preparation, you haven't put in the work, you can't fake that confidence, right? That confidence originates from the preparation, from the consistent effort that you put in daily. If you're one of those guys who have done that, so one, you have a base level of confidence. Now it's like, okay, let's actually find those those tricks and tips that are going to get us over the finish line. And for me, I think with every athlete, right, it comes back to really enjoying the moment, right? You don't want to put too much pressure, too much emphasis on it, because the reality is, I like to say pressure ceases to exist. You create it with your own imagination. Mm-hmm. All pressure is adding external things that don't really exist, right? You're worried about someone's opinion. You're worried about, the fans or whatever the case may be. It's not something that's internal. Right, so you have to be able to put the situation in its place and be like, this is just another opportunity for me to go out and play the game I love and play it to the best capabilities possible, right? My belief for anyone playing a sport or in any walk of life doing something competitive is to do it fast, physical, and free. And when I say free, I mean free of mind, right? So you can allow all that training and preparation that you've done over the days, over the weeks, years, to just take form out there. You're going out there, you're enjoying it. Because the reality is when you look back in your career, you look back in life, you'll look at all the things that you stressed about, that you put overemphasis on, and you're like, man, I wish I could go back, because it all works out after it, right? So being able to just really enjoy that moment, I think is going to be key for a lot of those guys. If you make a mistake, who cares? Next play, right? So I think they got to be able to adapt that mindset and just have a really, really good time playing hard and just enjoying and embracing that moment to set your life up for to accomplish your dreams.
That's awesome. And so what you heard there is a little glimpse into what you're going to hear from Colin as we move forward, and you're going to understand why he now has a company that specializes in this very thing, athletic fortitude. The insight that I've gained from Colin, I wish I would have known many, many years ago when I played ball, because I certainly could have used a lot of it, but that's certainly great feedback for those guys, and it makes a ton of sense, right? I mean, we all start playing a game because we love it.
Absolutely. I think that's what gets lost is like when you were a kid, you didn't think like, oh, I'm going to be a millionaire, right? You were playing the game just because, one, you were probably good at it, but two, because you just genuinely loved it. And I think that really gets lost in the shuffle. And, that carries in all walks of life. Like we said, whether you're starting a business, whether you're a professional athlete, whether you're, a grandmaster, whatever the case is, you're probably doing something because you love it, right? And you have to remember that through the tough times. And that's, like I said, anything. So I'm really excited to dive into these different conversations with different types of people, because anytime you achieve greatness, there's commonalities, right? But what's really cool is when you hear the things that make someone the true individual that they are, because each individual person is one of one. Right? So being able to find the commonalities between greatness and achievements, but also find what makes someone individually them and unique to them, I think is always really cool and fascinating when you find people who have achieved great things.
Excellent. Speaking of those conversations, when we come back, our first conversation ever on Beyond the Norm with a Pittsburgh fan favorite, someone who's made quite the name for himself on and off the field during his time here in Pittsburgh. Stay tuned for that. We're coming right back. Beyond the Norm is brought to you by Brushes and Beans Cafe in Murraysville, PA. I know a lot of people, you hear Murraysville and it's like, oh, man, that's out in the boot. No, very conveniently located right off of Route 22. Wherever you're going, there it is. And at Brushes and Beans, we are your home to the area's best coffee. And so when you come in and grab a coffee, you can also sit down and paint your own pottery. So when you're talking about relaxation, which is part of mental fortitude and being able to just clear your mind, great way to do it. Come in, sit down, grab, like I said, your favorite coffee drink. Colin has his. He loves cold brew. Come in, grab a drink, sit down, relax, pick a piece. It's a great gift idea. Great custom gift idea that you can make for the holidays, birthdays, whatever it may be. And also we have a private party room, which you can use, bachelorette parties, corporate outings. It's a great team building opportunity for those of you that look for that. And we want it to be a place where you can come, relax, be comfortable environment, clean, neat. And if we think we get you there, you'll really enjoy it. So once again, brought to you by Brushes and Beans Cafe and by Athletic Fortitude. Colin, take it away.
Yeah, so Athletic Fortitude, what we do, we work with professional and Olympic athletes. We created a private community in particular where we work with athletes on everything from mental health to performance psychology, right? We work in group settings, and we're really there to build, one another up. The idea is to get elite minds around other elite minds who are experiencing similar things and who want to elevate each other to ultimate levels. Also included, send out a weekly newsletter called the Fortitude Chronicle. Where I write.
I get it. It's excellent.
I appreciate that. I write about, just different things that are inspirational, motivational, and help create disciplinary habits, right? And then I include, different stories throughout the world that are going on to, give people a taste of what's really going on in the mental side of the world and to use those tips and actions to help elevate them to another level as well. Those are the big things involved with Athletic Fortitude, and we're taking it to the next level, and I'm excited to continue to work with people and help them out.
And now here's more Beyond the Norm.
It's an absolute pleasure for me to introduce our first guest here. He's the former Pittsburgh Pirates catcher. He's a current broadcast member for the Pittsburgh Pirates as well. And I'm fortunate enough to call him a good friend of mine these days. Michael Fort McKenry, thank you so much for coming. Yeah, the Fort, the legend. Thank you so much for coming on today. It really means a lot to us.
Hey, I appreciate it. And I know life's busy, but, just getting an opportunity to speak to good people, I'm really excited. And getting to meet you just a little bit. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a good conversation. And I'm really excited about what you guys are up to.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Really just want to give you a chance to introduce yourself for our listeners who maybe don't know you as well, and just go a little bit about your background, where you came from, and how kind of where you got to where you are today.
Well, it was a long journey. I'm 38 years old now. I played baseball my entire life. I tell people I slid out of the womb because I was about 6 weeks early, 4 pounds, 4 ounces, and I was a fighter right from the gate. But I was ready to join this world and get after it, I guess. My mom always said I was the strongest willed person she could ever imagine. And that still stands today. When I want something and put my eyes on it, I just do not let go. I'll run through a brick wall. I'll run through a burning building. It doesn't matter. God instilled that in me, and I think it comes from my mom's background and my dad being a little bit tougher on me than most kids. So it was a journey of I was going to make it to the big leagues. I remember saying it when I was 5 years old when my grandfather, who I thought was my grandfather, found out later on he wasn't. That's a whole other story. But he gave me my first glove and told me I was going to play in the big leagues. And from that moment, I said, yeah, I'm going to play in the big leagues. Yep. So every paper I wrote, everything I did was saying I was going to play in the big leagues. And I started to amass this plan as I got older. But I was always told I couldn't, always told I wouldn't. That's a silly dream. You're never going to do it. And it was just resentment. It was jealousy. But I believed a lot of it. In a way, and that became my fight against them instead of against the, maybe the story I wanted to create or, the life I wanted to create or the dream I wanted to chase. I was focused on a lot of the wrong things. So, my journey kind of started when I was growing up. I had two choices to make, the good kids or the bad kids. At one point, I chose the good kids, thank goodness. That was after being intoxicated on accident, I didn't really know what was going on. I was so naive. I was never taught a lot of things. So I was around drugs. I was around alcohol. At a very young age, 11, 12 years old, I'm in a room and guys are smoking and doing some different things. And it was just because I was naive. But as I understood that was going to hurt my body, I knew, no, I want to play. I want to do this. And I was always outside doing that stuff. So I made the right choice, chose the right path, started with a girl, youth group, music, put a seed in my heart, blossomed into something really, really cool. My faith in Christ, which happened at 16 out in Sevier County. I'll never forget it because I walked out into the wilderness just like he did. And I didn't really know this at the time. It's kind of reflecting back. And I put my head down and prayed because I literally thought I was going to poop myself. Yeah. I didn't know what was going on. I had such a churning in my stomach. And then I felt this sense of relief. Yeah. Like something just left me that I was carrying. And come to find out that was my cross. I didn't know then, but then that journey began, and it's been an up and down journey. And then the best part of my life was when I met my wife in college as a sophomore. Knew immediately after the first time I met her, my freshman year, or first time I hung out with her, that we were best friends. You just knew that. Yep. And they say marry a best friend and marry a person you could go to war with, and I did. And we've had our wars, we've had our fights, which we'll probably get into. But when I went to college, I had 3 goals. I had the goal of being an All-American, finding my wife, and getting drafted. And I did all 3. Went on to, pro ball, got drafted in the 7th round, was an All-American. I think I was the only All-American, and that's why I said it again, All-American in almost every category that did not get drafted in the first 3 rounds.
Wow.
Still really wild to think that, and looking back at the analytics and everything else, because I'm a nerd and I care and I have to find those answers sometimes. It didn't make any sense. So you kind of think back, everything they were saying, too small, too stocky, not mobile enough. And all those things have turned into passion of mine to help kids understand that you are good enough. You can do this. Look at what's right in front of you. Don't look at what's being said around you. And then also thinking about, hey, if they're saying you're not mobile, do they even understand what mobility is? If they're saying you're too stocky, do they even understand that? They say you're too slow and you're running a 6'8", 60. Does it make sense? Yeah. And asking those questions kind of been the story of my life. And, I want to help the good people win. So that's where I'm at. Turned into a career. Played 12 years, a little over parts of 7 or 8 in the big leagues. And then I took on the biggest fear of my life in broadcasting and TV and talking in front of people because I had 2 learning disabilities as a kid. And I was terrified to talk in front of people. I couldn't spell, had dyslexia. I was a mess as a kid. And I combated it by making fun of myself. That's how I made it through. But I was a great student because I worked my tail off and I wanted to be. I went to tutoring. I went to therapy. I went to a psychologist. I did all the things. My mom set me up for that. She was Dorothy Mantooth, if you remember that movie. She's absolute saint because her life was absolutely awful. And you're called to give your family and your children a better version of your life, or a way better version. She gave me a heavenly version comparative to hers. I mean, it was really tough. So, yeah, now I'm married almost 15 years. I'm living in Pittsburgh, born in Knoxville, lived in Nashville for about 7 years, but now I'm here. I'm happy to be a Yinzer/Yalzer is what I like to call it.
Nice.
So, yeah, that's my story in a nutshell. Kind of ran through it. A lot of ups and a lot of downs, but, man, it's been an absolute blast.
Lots to unpack.
Yeah,
there.
I was gonna say there's
lots to unpack. I mean,
As Colin knows, I am transparent, and I'll go where you want me to.
Mind. I mean,
you
we
lead,
could be
I
here all
follow.
day, but let's go back a little bit. So, in retrospect, when you look back, does it kind of amaze you that you were able to overcome everything you talked about from your childhood and then in college and being overlooked, and because of our size? I encountered the same thing. I'm not the tallest dude in the world either. So do you look back in sort of awe, and do you look up to the sky, and do you attribute a lot of it to your faith? What do you attribute? I mean, because a lot of people don't come out of that fort and end up in a very different place. So there's something, and I'm going to paraphrase this from the Bible. All things that happen, God allows, but we have to use it for his glory. It's something that's said a lot in our household. And the reason why I say that is I'm in awe of what he can do. What I did was just follow a path I believed in. And that belief came from a seed planted in me that I can't really understand. And I think that came from him and the Holy Spirit, trying to push me down the right path, but teaching me a lot of lessons along the way, because I didn't, by any stretch of the imagination, get to my pinnacle of a player as a player. And I would assume you could say the same thing. With injuries, with circumstances, with business, with just absolute terrible people. And it's not them to blame. It's the grace that I have to say, I'm glad all that happened. I'm glad every single thing that happened, all the surgeries, all the potential lawsuits, everything that's happened in my life has turned me into something I can't explain. And I'm on a journey I'm really excited about, and my big leagues is coming. So my first dream was just a stepping stone to whatever God has for me next.
I absolutely love that. And one thing that I really want to articulate, it's very similar to the saying, stop worrying about what happens to you and start wondering why it happens for you, right? You don't always know the answers when things happen, and it's easy to get caught up in that with the unknown, not knowing what's going to come. But always when you look back, you can always look at something and say, that's why this happened, right? And I think that's a really hard perspective, not even just for young athletes, but people in general to have, is knowing that there's always going to be something for you, right? So no matter how bad something is, there's a reason for it. And most of that time, you actually dictate that reason for, right? And it's emulating and, being a faithful person as well. That's a big carrier for me, right? It is knowing that I have the opportunity to control my perspective. And for me, God gives me that strength, right? And so it's, whether you're a faithful person or not, you have to find something that's going to help you channel moving forward, right? So when something bad happens to you, you got to find a bigger purpose, right? Like, okay, this happened. Now, how do I make it positive? Or just by God's grace, or if you want to look at the universe, however it draws it towards you, it's going to push you towards something, right? So being able to kind of construct that in the moment and recognize that, I feel like has been one of your superpowers from the the privilege of getting to know you and the conversations that. Yeah, absolutely. But it's not an easy perspective to have. So I kind of want to hear how you came to that, right? It's how you were able to learn to develop that, because it's not easy. It's actually really hard. But I want to hear in your own words maybe how you've been able to kind of adopt that mindset.
Being completely naive.
Okay.
And curious.
Yep.
So probably the easiest example is surgery.
Yep.
Right? You get hurt. Well, why did I get hurt? I'm in great shape. Like, I have great mobility. What is this? Like, why?
Yeah.
And then you start with that why, and then question after question after question. And for me, I was persistent. And my wife says I'm persistent that so much that I'm always going to wear down the resistance. And I think that's how you have to be. If you want to understand something, you have to go so hard at it to get to the bottom layer that your brain needs to say, okay. And then when you get there, you ask another question. But it all starts with you asking your questions internally.
Yep.
And most people don't even want to start there.
Yep.
It's always external, like you're just talking about. Most of that stuff happens to you externally. The only thing that really matters is what's happening internally.
Yep.
You know, because you can put on a face, you can do all these things from the outside. I mean, Drew Robinson, guy that shot himself. I played with him. He's the happiest, funniest, hardworking dude that you'd ever meet. He was just one of the dudes. But you could see there was something different about him, but he was never looked at because he was hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
And the issue on a lot of teams he was with were other players, and they were better players, so they got all the attention, all the focus, so he got overlooked, but he never asked that internal question. Yeah. And that's the hard part.
To cut you off real quick, have you heard that story about Drew Robinson?
No.
Oh, that's one of the craziest stories ever.
Yeah, you should put it in the link to this.
Yeah,
it's
unbelievable story.
Unbelievable story. It just brings you perspective.
Yes.
That it could, like, things can happen to anybody. And too, Colin, like, I think too often we're not willing to say, what did we do wrong?
Yep.
You know, and it's always a circumstance, a relationship, all those things. In my mind, and it's hard to get here, and I don't know if I'm completely here, you have to go back to Jesus and the cross. He bared everything and took ownership for everything we did. We have to do the same thing. It's on us. We carry our cross daily, period. Because if we don't, all we're going to do is have resentment, regret, frustration, anger, all these things that we do not need to live our life with, because we have to let those things go. And the only way to let it go is to first, churn it in, digest it, and poop it out.
So you said the hardest thing you've ever had to do in your life was to go on camera, right?
Well,
for AT&T. But
there's a moment in my life that literally changed my life when my wife's dad passed away. We can get into that,
okay,
but yeah, like
we'll talk about
performance standpoint. Yes.
I mean, I was in TV calling it for a long time. I was
gonna guess that.
Yeah. And I'm sure we could, when we're done here, we can swap some names and we know a lot of the same people.
Oh, yeah,
but
sure.
People at home think it's the easiest thing, right? You just sit in front of the camera and off you go. So talk to us about, you're a professional athlete, right? And so people say, well, it's a million times harder to become a professional baseball player than it is just to, when your career ends, to go on camera and talk about it. So give people some perspective there and what you had to overcome for it to be as good as you are now. Because I think everybody would appreciate, like, I make a point of it, I'm a huge baseball guy, to watch pre and post game just to get your analysis of what's happening inside the game. Because people have no idea. And I'm fascinated by the great tips you bring night after night after night, which in of itself, by the way, people, is insanely difficult, right? For 162 games, you're out there and you're breaking it down and you're finding these very interesting angles to all the games. So, give us some insight, Fort, into that and why it was so difficult for you and how you've overcome it. And it's probably your faith, but how you've been able to stand in front of the camera and bring it night after night after night.
I'm gonna start with kind of the journey a little bit. When I was a kid, without a choice, I was thrown into resource. I was pulled out of class, and I don't know if you remember that when you guys were in kids.
Yeah,
it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
And there was no rhyme or reason. They didn't tell me what I was supposed to be doing, why I was doing it, and every time it was completely different.
And especially at that age, the other kids were whispering.
I'm 8,
Michael
9, 10 years old,
yeah,
and it just did not make sense. And I wasn't doing bad in school and everything. And then when I would go up and do something in front of the class, if I got it wrong, something somebody laughed, somebody joked around, not knowing any better, and I was like, okay, why are they all getting it right? Why am I getting it wrong? And I'll never forget the first spelling bee. My sweat glands must have just started coming out like a fire hose. I'm a little kid, and then I smell like, onions and whatever you smell like as a kid.
Right.
I'll never forget it. Like it comes back to my memory every now and then. And I still to today will sweat on air and have that nervous tick that I can't control. And the solution that I was told from someone is like, oh yeah, get Botox, close up. I was like, how does that make any sense? Like, so just put a barrier up to a natural reaction. So all that over time, and some really tough teachers that, almost made me hate school and resent myself and resent my parents, sent me to anger management. I had ADD, and all that stuff, and I guess that went really well because after that, I've been like calmer and everything else, but that anger and that frustration still lives inside of me. But I've combated it, but it's all because I'm so strong-willed, because I have that want to, because I have that care of, being good at just about anything I touch. So that's where it started. But then I started having good teachers that taught me different, that showed me different. And I'll never forget when my wife, she's a communications major, she said, you need to take this lady for speech. And I was like, I'm a junior, still haven't taken speech. Most people take it as a freshman. I'm like, all right, I did it. I had to take it. And when I went in, I made my complete outline, did everything the way she wanted to. And I was trying to do the outline like they said, write the speech, do this, all. I couldn't do it. My brain would not process it. So I decided to memorize everything there and went up and was a nervous wreck and just kind of rattled through it. She pulled me aside. She goes, hey, I want you to do something for me. Next assignment you do, don't write anything, don't do anything, do what you want to do, and let's see what happens. And I went up and talked about catching gear. I brought in another guy. I brought in all the gear. I had props. I had everything that nobody was doing. And she goes, you just got an A and you got the best score in the class. My confidence started to rise. And that confidence turned into conviction. That conviction turned into something that could possibly be something down the road. But from there on out, I decided, all right, I'm going to dive in. Nope, I'm going to cannonball in. And I just cannonballed in. So I started reading to kids, did Read for America, and that was terrifying. I was missing words. So nervous I was missing words on the book. But I learned as I was missing it, they would laugh, and I'd be like, got ya, and I would have fun with it. And I'm like, oh, I can get bad at that way. And it just kept growing by doing it. And when I got hurt in 13, I spoke 13 times from July 27th to the end of the year, and I did probably 25 interviews, as many as I could, as often as I could. If they asked me, I said yes. And that got me to a place where I was even more comfortable, and then kind of took off from there. And in 13 also, while I was hurt, they asked me to fill in for Teak. And I didn't want to. My wife wanted me to. My mom pushed because my wife pushed my mom. So I did it, and I was supposed to do one day, ended up doing 11. And that was the film or the interview they had to bring me in to have the second interview, and then I got the job.
That's fascinating.
So that's the storyline right here. And then the TV side is we're in a studio now. Camera one, two camera, Colin's camera. So the thought is you have to learn all that. You have to learn the production side. I've learned how to edit, direct, produce, done radio, TV, podcasting, everything. And if you learn the ins and outs behind the scenes, what our man over there is doing, it gives you a different perspective. And then you can think about the rundown and how that'll play. And, you talk about the baseball side. That's the easy part. It's, do we have someone to edit it? Do we have the ability to do that? Is that camera going to go out? Is the audio going to go out? And we're going to have to, and then you have time limits. So you have all these things. So it's a blast. It's a blast. Once you get on TV, it's a blast. Some of the behind the scenes stuff can get tough. Like today I'm working with a new host, a new director, and a new producer from last night's game. But we have to go over last night's game. Right. So think about that. So they weren't in the conversation last night. They probably didn't even watch the show. And now we're going to go in. We think through it. And I send my notes in every night after the game and kind of see what happens. But yeah, it's fun. It's a blast. Sometimes it get hard, because I always think about the human element and being the player. You never want to bury them because it's so hard. So you look at things like, all right, how do I break this down and teach somebody at home something that happened today, or give them some insight of where this could be going? And you have to think about some things differently, but at the same time, have high standards, high principles, just like you did as a player. If I would go in and say something to that guy about his effort, his attitude, then I'm going to say it on air.
Right.
Yeah. I love that.
Because the fans deserve that.
Absolutely, they do. Really glad you just said that. But I do want to take a step back and emphasize a few key points that you made that, maybe our listeners didn't pick up on that I did. So when you talk about, as a kid, right, the learning disabilities, the getting picked on, didn't know what to answer, right, your spelling bee experience. So what I think is super unique is how you can relate on opposite ends of that. I was the kid winning spelling bees, right? I was the kid who grew up just
People don't think about that.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, but different pillars.
Right. And I'm going to try and be efficient with this as I connect it to another point that you made later. But when you're that young kid, and even when you're the one winning the spelling bees and you're the smart one, and I'm glad I can look back and say I didn't pick on people for not being.
It was never the winners.
Yeah, right. It wasn't.
It was
Never.
yeah.
And then that's the same way in life.
Yeah.
People that come after you or, or your biggest critics are never doing better than you, ever.
Right.
Right? They're the people that, have a thought theory. Like I got one the other day. I hate to interrupt.
No, you're good.
I tweeted something out about Jack Swinski. He's been struggling. This guy's a great human being, as is Andy Haynes. They've been out more than I've ever seen two guys work from this offseason through spring training, through winter, and they know biomechanics. They know how they're supposed to be moving in every sense of the direction, and they know what they're supposed to be doing. And I got a comment the other day. It's like, tell them to choke up. And obviously, whoever said that has not watched any of the games.
Right.
Dude chokes up every single game. But the reality of it is he runs out of bat away.
Yeah.
He has to create space to even touch that ball down and away. And that's a huge area of emphasis they're trying to get him to stay onto. And this person's naive, but then they won't follow up.
Yep.
And that's the biggest thing is like, hey, man, I'll tell you exactly what's going on. This is what's happening, but you have to follow up. It's never as simple as you think.
Right.
Yeah.
To circle back to the point, because, I mean, you've improved again there. You have those intermediary who are making fun, right? So here's me winning the spelling bees. And then as I progress through school, I start to challenge myself less and less because I want to be the kid that's smart, right? I want to be the kid that's not getting made fun of for being dumb. And it goes to athletics, too, where it's like, I'm trying to pick the easy wins to make myself look superior, right? And so to fast forward to your other point where it's like, hey, I hated speaking in front of people, couldn't learn. They were trying to force a square peg into a round hole. And your ability to get through that is, one, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right? Being able to push through that feeling of nervousness, which, I say is the same thing as excitement. You get to choose the perspective you want. But being able to do that's not easy, right? But when you do it, it's so rewarding, and you actually realize that thing that you were so nervous about is actually one of the things that you were meant to do and you were really great at, right? So developing it at a young age and being able to hyper focus on the work and the effort, regardless of whatever the outcome is, you see yourself skyrocket, right? When you get obsessed with that work, and whether it's proving yourself right and proving people wrong when necessary, being able to dive into that work side. So I really hope that when people listen to this, that they were able to kind of hear that progression and hear that story, because it's really important when we look at kids at young ages, and even through middle school, high school, professionally, when they get older, right? That never stops, right? When you can become over obsessed with that work element and get detached from the outcome and be supportive of the people around you, that's when you can get that real growth. And that's where you see people achieve things beyond the norm, right?
Yeah, superly well said. And everybody loves being at the pinnacle, having the event. Nobody loves the process. And
Right.
I say adore the process and you'll never care about the event again.
Yep.
And it's so true. And something else that kind of go off what you just said is there's a train of fear and grief that everybody can ride. And if they're willing to jump on and take that ride, where their destination will be remarkable. Most people won't get on. And then some people get on and realize that they have to throw the coal in the fire and they won't do it. And, going through some journeys of grief and of fear, I can 100% tell you, yes, you have to do it. You have to face it. And if you don't believe me, go look at every success story on the planet.
Yep.
Yeah. We're going to pick it up there in a minute, but first we're going to take a little break, take a little breather. There's a lot to digest there in the first, 20 minutes of Fort. Amazing stuff.
I appreciate it.
My mind is churning. I mean, I could throw a million questions your way. Let's take a break first. We'll be right back. As we told you earlier, so we don't have to go on all the details again, Beyond the Norm is brought to you by Brushes and Beans Cafe in Murraysville and by Athletic Fortitude. And now, more Beyond the Norm. Welcome back, everybody. And we were just talking a little bit off camera. Just wait, buckle up, because there's more coming with Michael Fort McKenry. Fort, before we went to break, you talked about grief and how important it is to be able to emotions. So talk to us about the various things that have happened in your life and what you've learned from them and how you've moved forward.
Well, first off, most emotions, if not all emotions, are 1,000% choices. You can make a choice to be happy, sad, mad, frustrated, everything else. The feelings may be a little bit different, because that's more of a chemical release. But you can control those feelings and how you respond. That took a lot for me, because I was 100 either way.
Right.
I was either going to fall on the sword or run towards the battles. Nothing else was going to happen for me. But When I was in pro ball, 2008, I'm in a weird situation. I wasn't enjoying the time there. It's the first time I've ever felt that way. I was getting really confused about what to do. My manager is probably the smartest dude on the planet when it comes to baseball, and my pitching coach is probably the dumbest human being on the planet when it comes to baseball, but he's a really nice guy that, I had dinner with at his house, but when he got the uniform on, he was a terrible human being. And he was forgetful, resentment, and I was in between something I'd never thought I'd be in, between a pitching coach, which I was always really close with, ended up living with some of my pitching coaches through the minor leagues, and the player, my teammates, my boys.
Yeah.
And I lived there for 3 months, and then I got a call on the bus at 2 a.m, June 24th, 2008. It was my wife, my fiance at the time. We got engaged just prior to that. Hysterical. I couldn't even understand what she was saying. And her dad just got life flighted to UT Hospital, and he had a stroke. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know anything. So I'm asking her what to do in her hysterical state. And why am I asking her? That's not the right thing to do. What should I do? So I just went up to my manager, told him what was going on. And when I got back to Modesto, I was out, and I flew in. By the grace of God, the Rockies let me stay through June 6th. I mean, think about that. I'm in pro ball. You get 3 days, right?
Right. 3
days. I was there for 12.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right. And during that time, I slept at the hospital. I hit wiffle balls. I made my dad throw me wiffle balls every day. He could come up. I threw against the wall, and I hardly showered because I wanted to be there. I knew I was supposed to be there. I didn't really think anything else. I would go home and shower every now and then, but I was there with my wife constantly. And watching that now, kind of being able to go backwards, it was weird. So here we are. My wife is watching her best friend and dad fight for his life, and I've never seen so much selfishness in a OR waiting room in my entire life for almost a week and a half before he passes away. And I had to look back at that because our innate instinct as human beings is to make things about ourselves, especially in times of grief.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I was watching that, and I'm watching my wife just suffer. And I didn't know then, but being able to look back, like I said, I've gone back and beat up some traumas and some understandings in my heart and in my mind over the last couple of years. It was remarkable to me. And then seeing that now to today is crazy. So he ends up passing away after my wife talked to him the day before. He ended up having AVM. They were going in to fix the AVMs. They punctured his lung. He ended up dying of multiple organ failure. So it was actually malpractice that caused the death. Here we are. Her parents just got a divorce, so Jacqueline has all the power of attorney, everything, making all the decisions, everything else. They're talking about pulling the plug, talking about this, and here I am like, what
Right.
like, what do I do? And she's hysterical. No one's helping her.
Yeah.
We're 22 years old
Right.
and lost. So after all that, she gets him to not wake up because he's sedated, but give a peace sign. They were trying to get him to respond and see if he would respond because they wanted her to pull the plug. They were trying to prove it to her that he needed to go. And he gave a peace sign when she goes, "Dad, give me a peace sign." And he just did that. So that's always special to her heart. But then a day or two later, she's walking, about to go in the room, see the flat line. I see her fall. And I could cry right now. Yeah. That moment changed her life, and it changed my life because I never knew what love was until that moment. When I saw the person that is my person fall to the floor and grieve like she did, I know how much she loved her because I would fall to the floor if that happened to her. It broke me into something in a journey that I can't explain. So I picked her up, and I recently was there. Another family member, I guess it was about a year and a half ago, at the same hospital. And I thought about the walk I made from that room out of the hospital. I carried her for almost a mile in the elevator, all the way down. I don't think that 100, well, maybe 100 pounds. She may have been about 85 pounds because of all the stuff that was going on. Right. But I carried her. And think about that. Like, Colin, you're in great shape. Yeah. I'm in decent shape, strong as an ox. I hadn't been working out. I hadn't been sleeping. I hadn't been eating well. Every second I had that I could, I would go work out or go hit baseballs and everything. I was killing myself. And I picked her up and carried her a mile like this. So what does that mean? That I didn't understand any emotion because I didn't see them properly. I didn't embrace them. I wasn't taught them by interaction or anything else. So I always defaulted to the choice of happy. I was Buddy the Elf.
Right.
That moment showed me grief, showed me hurt, showed me pain that I never could experience because my parents would let me go to funerals. All these things. My first funeral was my uncle, and I couldn't get over the fact that nobody told me he was gay. When I showed up, and I was like, I didn't even know him. You know, I could care less what he did or how he did it. He was a great human being to me, and I never knew. So that's the only time I had any experience of going to a funeral until that moment. Any type of grief I could have possibly had, it's the person I love. So I look back at that now, and I have realized that love showed me where to go with my relationship with Jesus, because her being picked up is like Jesus picking up the cross for us. In a very small understanding of a human being. I can't understand God. I can't understand him doing that for us. I can't understand doing that for anybody else, but I did it for her. So it gave me a small picture of what love was in a Christ form and what love is by him picking up the cross and dying for us. Because in that moment, I just let go. It was an experience that I can say the Holy Spirit took me over. And that's how I understood grief. That's how I get through grief, is I look through it as much as I can. I'll get a telescope out and go to depths that nobody wants to go. But I think that's what you have to do. If you want to be completely transparent, completely vulnerable, and use what God's giving you, you got to go into that wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights and look at it and then come out and face it like he did with the devil. And me, I always say I'd want a cheeseburger personally with an egg on it. But him, he's asking the devil questions, making him, double down on, what he's trying to do. So that's the reality. Is I learned through doing, just like everything else in my life. I cannonballed in and didn't necessarily want to, or knew I needed to.
Nobody wants to do. Go there.
But like I didn't know any better. I just knew I was supposed to be here for her because that's the right thing to do. And then I figured out what love was, what hurt was, what grief was, and all these things by watching the person I love hurt. Because I don't know if I would have had the same emotional effect at all with someone in my family dying like that. I would with my mom, but like with my dad and stuff, because I hadn't seen that. But now I get it.
Right.
Man, normally I have an immediate thought. I mean, there's so much there. Well, one, just want to thank you for being willing to share that, because the emotions are real, right? For those who choose to watch this or listen, those emotions are super real and you can feel it.
I'm not going to fake crying. I hate it. But like it really does. Like when I let myself get there, Colin, it's even when I think about what the cross means, I can't, I'll start, like I literally will start shaking like I am. I can't express to you what I feel. Yeah. And that's genuine. Yep. And when people, talk about anything and they don't have enthusiasm or passion behind it, I always ask, is that genuine? Is that real? Yeah. I need to know more, because you can't do anything in life without enthusiasm and without, a deep desire or focus to do it. Yeah.
And you can feel it. Like it's more than just seeing, like you feel that emotion too. So like you say, when you have to ask that, it's because you're not feeling it. When something's true and authentic like that, you feel it, right? And it affects everybody in the room. And that was, awesome. And I just want to thank you again for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem. And, I mean, the crazy thing, and real quick, the crazy thing for me is realizing that seeing hurt from someone else is so much more than me hurting.
Absolutely. Right.
Oh yeah. And that's not. I didn't know how unnormal that was. I mean, I've been through a lot of sessions of therapy to figure out some things like that. But like, I didn't understand why things didn't affect me the same way. But seeing that and understanding that, the people around me, it's that I call it the Navy SEAL effect. Is like you have to retrain your brain to usually do that. But like, because my mom did that to me my entire life, I was it. Like my mom would have literally jumped out of a plane and caught me and threw me back in to save me at any moment. That she would do it now in her own way, right? But when you realize that type of like thing's been instilled in you, whether it's a generational trauma thing or an absolute gift, I have no clue, but it feels like a gift and a curse depending on the day. But that blew me away. And that took years after that moment to even see that. It blows me away that I care about even people I don't know over myself so often, if not all the time.
So many things you said just now resonated with me. I have 5 kids.
That's awesome.
I was the youngest of 6 growing up. And similar to your dad, my dad never showed emotion. Right? My oldest brother passed away when I was a sophomore in high school. First time I really experienced grief. But nothing from dad. Nothing. Right?
And that's maybe all he knew, right?
Right. And I think
wild.
his upbringing was, I mean, we could write a whole book on that. But, and so these emotions, now that I have, I wanted to be like my dad, right? Which kid doesn't want to be like their dad and emulate their dad? So I was stoic, right? And emotions were, but now as I've gotten older and I'm a father with kids, and I see that it's important to show them that it's okay, right? You're going to experience these feelings, as you mentioned, Fort. How hard has it been for you to go back and unpack all that stuff? Because I'm 50, right? You're 30, I'm 50. And that's one of the things Colin and I've talked is a different generational thing. And I admire your generations because you do it much better. And it's always been, you've been open about it. You've been honest how important it is to do it. How were you able to do that? And what, is it a constant thing with you that you're just like, you're breaking stuff down, you're putting that telescope on things and really trying to apply what it means and how you'll react to it?
That would be another podcast to really get into that. But what I'll say is this.
We'll take you up on that. Let's book them.
Because that's all within the last 3 or 4 years for me.
Okay.
Deeply. And it was after when I tore my ACL. But what I would say is the only reason I'm sitting here is because of the grace of God and my wife. Not I would never hurt myself because I care about other people way more than myself. That's just stupid in my mind. I know people go through that, but that doesn't make any sense to me. But like I was at a low of lows, and it's because I didn't understand much of anything of why I was going through these deep thoughts of why people had hurt me and how I'd put my face of Jesus into the church and into human beings instead of into Jesus. And I realized I've been saved since I was 16, but never had a relationship. That really hurt. And then the grief I felt and the shame I felt of the sin of what he did for me was overwhelming. I couldn't even look up, couldn't say Jesus. And it's been tough, and I'm getting out of that, and I see light and I see grace, but I don't care if I see darkness anymore. I really don't care. Like I'm like, if I get more of this, give me more. I'm ready now. I get it. I'm out of the boat. I'm walking on the water, and let's roll. Like, and I'm not scared, and the biggest reason I was scared is because I was doing it on my own. And I'm sure Colin could contest this, you as well, is that so often we want to, as performers and athletes and people, we want to carry the cross and we want to take it and like, I got it. Leave me alone. I got it. I'll fix it. I'm going to do it. And then you realize, about a mile in, your legs are getting weak. You're getting weary. And I'll never forget, me and my wife said the same verse at the same time last year, and we literally bought a house a week later. It was in Isaiah, and it said, I'm going to paraphrase this, is just keep moving forward and listen to the whispers behind you. And I always thought God was in front, but you lead from the back. And I was like, oh, so he's been whispering left, right. And I have a picture, and I'll give it to you for this. It's a quote in Isaiah, and it says, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." It was right before I did a faith night. I'll never forget this. I didn't know it was on my phone. I don't know how it got there. I don't even remember taking a screenshot. It had arrows pointing everywhere, and it was stuck on my phone screen. And that verse hit me like a ton of bricks with my wife. And I was like, oh, I've been making those choices. And it made me going up. And I kid you not, be here, boom, here, boom, here, boom, here, boom. And it was unreal. I'm like, that's been my life. That's been what's happening to me. And I was trying to share it, and nobody would listen because of what I'd been going through. And I realized at that moment I'm talking to the wrong people.
No, that's powerful. And I think one thing, again, there's a number of different things, but like you said, we could be here for a whole nother podcast all day. But one thing you said that that resonates really well with me. And this is really good learning, from one another, is that we want to carry the cross for everyone. And I look at my experiences, with my own family, and frequent, when things are hard for, like, my wife and I were dealing with things we can't control, she'll be emotional and she'll say to me, like, aren't you sad? Like, why aren't you, like, crying? And, like, for me, it's always, I don't want her to see I'm hurting because I know it'll hurt her. So I have to bear that pain knowing that it'll help her. But I need to do a better job of communicating that, like, hey, like, I feel these emotions. I'm aware of them. I just have to put them in a different place so I can be here for you. And, I think as my daughter grows and as we have more kids, they need to at least know that I understand the feelings that I'm going through, and they're going to feel infinite amount of feelings as they grow up. It's just, I need to be able to communicate, this is the way I deal with certain things. I need to bear certain things for you guys, right? But also being vulnerable to let them get a piece of that experience too, so they can grow, right? And I think this has been a learning, for me with the depth of this conversation, is maybe I need to show a little bit more of what I'm feeling instead of, hiding it and bearing it for everyone. So that really stuck out to me.
I appreciate it. Something I've learned that was really hard is those questions.
Yep.
Especially and with my wife, is ask her.
Yeah.
Constantly. They're smarter. And they see things a little bit differently, and we get that meathead look at it sometimes. And I think asking those questions, you'll figure out a lot, and they'll see the care. Yeah. They'll see the response. When I can slow down enough, I have a hard time doing that sometimes. It really helps. It's really helped me, and it makes her feel seen. Because I'm sure you were TV, right? It looks like I'm giving everyone else everything every day. But like I just told you guys, the last 5 years, by doing this job after retiring from baseball, I had a lot of time. I just lost the thing I chased my entire life. What am I doing? I lost my identity. So for 5 years, I'm on camera, getting better and better and better, showing enthusiasm and all these things, and I'm doing all this stuff around, going through the worst grief, worst pain, worst trauma I've ever gone through in my entire life. And that's the reality, is like, she knows what's going on at home. It's tough. She doesn't know how to deal with it. I don't know how to deal with it. She'd already been through some of the worst things in her life, and now it's my turn. And it's like, man, if we run through this, are we going to end up on the good side or the bad side? And what is the good side or bad side? And coming out now, it's like, man, this is going to be really big, and this is going to be really cool, because God's going to allow something that we could not see.
If you don't mind, Colin, how cool, on the flip side of all, and this has been an incredible conversation, and I can't thank you enough.
I can't thank you guys enough.
People define pinnacle, they define success differently. But as someone who grew up loving sports, played baseball my whole life, my last name's Clementi, for crying out loud, and I grew up in Pittsburgh, right? So
Legend.
Yes, right?
Legend.
When you get a nickname, right, you come to Pittsburgh, you instantly, it was almost overnight, right, become a fan favorite to the point where you get a nickname, right? Everything you're working for, it's like, man, like it all paid off. And, in that moment, being part of that team, and I'm sure that was huge for you too. We could go on and on, because I wanted to ask you about the team but for another time,
No doubt.
But when you got the nickname, right, and they announce you, right, Tim Tobacco announces your name, and fans go nuts. How did you deal with that, right? Because you had been through so much. And to me, like I said, that would be the pinnacle for me. Like, I got the nickname, the fans love me, everything's going great. How do you stay grounded in that moment, right? How do you not back off, right? I mean, Colin and I talk about hard work all the time, and that's the difference. And you mentioned it yourself. It's all about the work you put in. How do you not stop at that point? How do you not back off and say, I made it? I'm the fort.
I think defining the made it is the one thing you keep asking. And you get complacent, and you start to fall out of the love of the game, and it is because of things like that, because they always say everybody's mountain's a different height, but once you get there, there's no one there.
Right.
And I always tell kids the hardest thing you'll ever deal with isn't failure, it's success. Failure is a teacher. Success teaches you nothing. So you get up there and you're like, what do I do now? And I have 25 years of my trainer saying there's been 2 guys that have made it, succeeded at a level like the NFL or MLB, and stayed. Think about that. The guy that helped you get there, you leave when you make the pinnacle because you have every excuse in the world not to go now. Myself and Harrison Smith.
Wow.
That's it.
Great safety. Yeah.
Never left. And I always remember that. And if you really want something, you're not going to leave the thing that helped get you there. And you're at least going to learn from it or appreciate it. Most people don't. You get there and you're like, yeah, whatever. But then they'll have that pit. And they'll look around and they have no ladder. They have no hand. And it's like, what just happened? But there'll be one person there underneath them picking them up. And they'll just be kicking him in the face, and that's Jesus. I did that in my life. I learned from that, and I grew. And the biggest thing about the fort is it's there. Now I got to use it. And I got to use it for his glory. And I think about, what is a fort? Why did I get it? What's Fort McKenry? That flag stands today because of Fort McKenry. So I have to represent my country, my ultimate leader in God, and say, how am I going to build some bricks for other people and help them build their fort? Because if I can't, then what am I doing?
You want to take the last question?
Yeah, super powerful again. Of all the things that we've covered today, maybe what's one thing you want our listeners to pick up on as they're trying to create their own version of beyond the norm, where they're trying to achieve great things? Of the millions of lessons you've provided today, what is your one special nugget per se that you want to leave for the guys and girls listening?
Look in, look up, and then look out. I can't say that enough. Like, people would say look up. Snoopy says that. And the reality of it is, it's like, we're humans. If you can't look in, you're never going to look up. And if you are looking up, it's probably just going to be surface. So I'd say look in, look up, and then look outward. My wife has a yoga certification. It's Holy Yoga. And they have this awesome thing about posture. You have to line this way before you can align this way. And I would say you have to line this way to align this way to align that way. Because if you can't, you're never going to have a relationship. It's going to be surface. That's why the church is falling apart. That's why religion to me sucks. Because you're not creating a relationship with anybody and everybody that you meet. It has nothing to do about showing up, giving your dues and leaving, going to lunch and eating a cupcake. It's about growth. It's about pain. It's about suffering. And it's about learning from that. And then helping the person that you can by telling that story. Because if you're not telling the story, then you're not healing either.
I appreciate it for it.
Yeah.
I appreciate you guys. Yeah.
I appreciate you so much. This has been incredible. I mean, you set the bar. For our first episode, you set the bar way high.
I was the first?
First.
Yeah, first episode.
I appreciate that.
First.
Yeah, that's
You're
humbling.
first.
That's humbling. Too cool.
So we really appreciate your time, and it's been an honor to get to know you a little bit, and we definitely want to take you up, and hopefully sometime in the future we'll have you back for a future episode.
I'd love that. I'd come anytime. It's a sick setup, and I really appreciate this guy. He's one
guy's special.
He's one of few that I could say, hey, this guy's real. So
no doubt about it. So huge thank you to you.
Thank you guys. God bless. Yeah.
We'll be back with more in a minute. What an amazing conversation with Fort, Colin. I mean, you nailed it with him. Certainly learned a lot. And just so anxious, as you mentioned in the intro to the show, to hear from all these other folks that have experienced success and achieved a high level in their respective careers. It pumps me up for what's to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't reiterate how much I appreciate Fort and the friendship that we've built and him coming on the show, because, his story, as you heard, is just a testament to so many different things. And super excited to continue these conversations with different people, but really want to give a shout out to him for being our first guest and coming on and sharing his story.
Yeah, great way to start our podcast, man, with the Fort.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. What a kickoff.
Yeah, right. We set the bar up here, and now it's like, now we
got to live up to it.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Anyway, before we say goodbye for this week, we're going to do a segment to say goodbye. It's called Not Normal, and we're just going to look at something else that's going on that, either Colin or I, we read, we come across, we see it, that just makes us go, wow, like, this is amazing. We don't know how they do it. It takes such a high level of mental aptitude to achieve what they've done. And so this week, apologize, it's sports again, but I was just, sports mood this week, I guess. I don't know. But it just so happens it's the PGA, the Tour Championship. And as someone who plays golf and stinks and gets frustrated and throws clubs, I've deposited several clubs in various bodies of water across the eastern United States. I just marvel at the consistency. Let's look at who do we have? Scotty Scheffler, Victor Hovland, Rory McIlroy, my boy. I love Rory. Love to watch Rory. And John Rahm.
Yep.
What they've done this year is nothing short of extraordinary. I mean, especially when you play golf. All you guys out there are watching this and gals that are watching this, when you see what these guys have been able to do week after week, month after month, playing golf at the highest level, and have that type of consistency, it just blew me away. Colin, how do they do it?
Yeah, so I think number one, golf is one of the most fascinating, sports in the world when it comes to the mental side of things, and actually some of my favorite athletes in general to work with, right? Because the mindset is so different for them, and it has to be so singularly focused on the next shot. And Victor Hovland, who just won the BMW championship, actually echoed that sentiment after he won, and they interviewed him, and they said, like, how did you have that historic comeback? Like, what did you do? And he was like, honestly, it was a mindset shift. He's like, I took a step back. He was like, I wasn't calculating what shot I needed to get on each hole, what score. He was like, I just approached each shot and was like, make this the best shot that I possibly can. And I think that it's such a simple mindset, and it's so appropriate. It's extremely hard to do, particularly when you're carrying, maybe a bad shot from a previous hole. You're thinking like, man, I got to catch up. I'm way behind. I'm not playing my best. But really being able to singularly focus on the next shot. That's going to be the differentiator with golfers who can actually execute that. And, guys like John Rahm, Rory McIlroy too, dealing with all the drama from the live fallout. One thing I'll say, they've both handled the media in two completely separate ways. But the ability for each of them to show up and compete with that type of pressure, that type of nonsense off the course going on is just a testament to their ability to focus on what's important, what they're doing, and to be able to block out the noise on the outside.
And that's such a discipline, because I can remember when anything in life with me, I'm always looking ahead, right? I started out, I was going to go to med school, and then in my mind, I'm like, I can't do 7 more years of this stuff.
Yep.
I mean, what type of work? I mean, what does it take, Colin, to be able to singularly focus, as you say, on today?
Yep.
And not worry about what's to come and what's down the pipe? Because when you're a golfer, you're probably thinking, okay, you're watching the scoreboard that's up, and he's now 3 under, I got 4 shots, and so you're thinking ahead,
right,
and what you have to do.
I mean, there's a number. Again, everything is always going to have multiple answers, right? So the way I look at it is you have to have an in-depth knowledge and concept of what time is. Time's going to go by whether you do nothing or whether you work your butt off, right? No matter how far behind you are or how far ahead you are, if you do not consistently do work and work on your mindset, work on your physical skills, you're going to get lost in the shuffle at some point, right? And the way to get disciplined and the way to get consistent with it is to develop systems that create habits, right? And I'm a big believer in formation of habits, because the definition of having a habit is doing something without thinking, right? And people say, well, if you have so many habits and you do so many things, like, how are you going to have enough time? And the reality is, having habits and discipline creates freedom. When you wake up in the morning and brush your teeth, you don't think about it, right? You just go and do it. You don't have to dwell on it. You don't have to think about it for 10, 15 minutes. Right, yeah. Like, am I going to brush my teeth today? No. You don't think that. It's a habit, right? Mm-hmm. So the reality is, the more habits you can create, the more time efficient you become. The more time efficient you become, the more things you can get done. The more things you can get done, the better you become, right? So it's being able to put those systems in place and being able to have, that flexibility once you create that discipline, right? It's one of my favorite, and I have a bunch of different mantras, sayings, but discipline equals freedom, right? So the more discipline you can become in your life, the more freedom you'll actually end up having.
That's fascinating. More of that to come in upcoming weeks. Speaking of which, that wraps up this week's podcast. Once again, a huge thank you to Fort Michael McKenry for joining us. And until next week, everybody, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon. Have a great week.